Hi everyone, it's Sarah Todd. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my diagnosis story. A very dramatic story of how I was diagnosed with one disorder 10 years ago and how I was re-diagnosed with another disorder 3 years ago. So if you're interested in that, please keep on watching. Before you watch this video, I recommend that you watch this video that is linked up at the top, how I became paralyzed from the neck down. In this video, I share how I became disabled when I was 8 years old in 2010. I walk you through the whole story, how that happened, and I think that gives you a good background for some things that you might want to understand a little bit better before you watch this video. So assuming that you know all of that knowledge from that video, let's just get right on into my diagnosis story. The day after I became paralyzed from the neck down, I was diagnosed with Transverse Myelitis, or TM for short. TM is an autoimmune disorder where the body attacks the spinal cord. So I had spinal cord damage from the levels C2 to T1, which is a really large section of the spinal cord. You can get a good visual of that in this picture here. You can see in this picture that C2 to T1 runs from about the neck to the middle of the body. So a large portion of my spinal cord was damaged. And I was diagnosed with TM because I presented that way. TM typically causes paralysis, it causes spinal cord damage, and that's why I was diagnosed with TM. But as I grew older, I ended up meeting a lot of people who also had TM. And I went to summer camps for kids who were also diagnosed with TM, and I made so many friends there. My best friend, Jen, who's 4 years older than me, she's like my sister, she actually is diagnosed with TM. So I met so many people with TM, and that was a great thing because they understood a lot of what I was going through. We could relate to each other, and I made some lifelong friendships there. But I found myself feeling like I presented a lot differently than most of the other kids who had TM did. Most of those kids were wheelchair users. They were paraplegics, so they were paralyzed from the waist or chest down. And I wasn't a wheelchair user. I recovered the ability to walk. I just had paralysis in my arms and hands, which most people there didn't have. It was either just in their legs or it was their legs and their arms. There weren't really many kids who just had paralysis in their arms and hands and not in their legs. So I felt like that was a little odd. I wasn't presenting like these kids were. And the other thing was many of these kids didn't have full sensation anymore. And I only lost my sensation for about a day, and then it came back. So I have full sensation. And so that was another difference between me and these kids, and that was just like really unusual. So my mom and I, we just started to notice these differences between me and the other people we met who also had TM. And then in 2012, 2 years after I was diagnosed with TM, there were reports of these cases in, I believe, California, of kids who were becoming paralyzed just out of nowhere. And then in 2014, there were more reports of cases of kids becoming paralyzed out of nowhere. And one of the doctors who I'd met at these camps for kids with TM started studying these cases, and they coined the term acute flaccid paralysis, or AFP, for these kids, which was similar to TM, but different from TM. And my mom started to become convinced that I actually had AFP and not TM. And then a few more years passed. They kept seeing more cases of kids just randomly becoming paralyzed, and it seemed to happen every other year. And there were more and more cases every other year. And eventually they changed the name from AFP, acute flaccid paralysis, to acute flaccid myelitis, or AFM. And so my mom just became convinced this is what I had because these kids were presenting more like I was. It seemed like many of them either became paralyzed all the way from the neck down, like I was, and stayed that way, or they became paralyzed from the neck down like I was and recovered in a very unusual pattern like I did, like where I have this very spotty paralysis. My paralysis presents in an unusual pattern in my arms and hands. Like I can move certain areas of my arms and I can't move other areas. It's not just absolute. And there were also cases where kids would just have maybe one limb that was paralyzed and that's all that was ever paralyzed. So it just seemed like I fit in with these kids more. They were presenting more like me. And this doctor that I knew had become an expert on this. He was researching it all the time. He was trying to figure it out. He was seeing kids and diagnosing them with AFM. And he was based in Dallas. So in 2018, my mom and I flew to Dallas because we just wanted to know. Being diagnosed with TM versus AFM doesn't make a huge difference in terms of treatment necessarily when you're as far out as I was, having had it for 8 years. But I really just wanted to know because it kind of gives you a sense of just finality, just knowing that that's your diagnosis, this is what you have. And we thought that it would just help me feel like I belonged in a group more, like I knew why I seemed so different from the kids who had TM. And we also just thought that it would be groundbreaking if my diagnosis was changed from TM to AFM, because these cases of AFM, they didn't start becoming a big thing in the news or as prevalent until like 2012. And I had this happen to me in 2010. So I would have been one of the very earliest cases of AFM. It was so frustrating seeing people say, oh, this disease didn't exist until 2012, because we were just like thinking that's not the case. This happened to me in 2010. It happened before 2012. So we flew to Dallas, we saw this doctor, and he re-diagnosed me with AFM. And my mom and I were just like, wow, like we figured that that is what my diagnosis was. It really didn't surprise us. We just figured that's what I had after seeing all of these cases coming up in the news. So yes, now I have a diagnosis of acute flaccid myelitis, or AFM. And so now I have become really focused on raising awareness for AFM, especially because it does appear in the news quite frequently. It is often termed modern polio, but it is not polio. It's just very similar to polio. And so it sparks a lot of public interest. It's been in the news a lot. I was on a Nightline feature covering AFM that was released a few months ago. So it is a very hot topic. So I focus a lot of my activism on AFM because it really deserves more awareness. It's affecting so many kids and it needs to be understood much more than it is. So yes, I have AFM, and there are a lot of differences between TM and AFM, but the main ones are that, like I said, TM is an autoimmune condition. So the body is attacking the spinal cord there and causing the damage. But with AFM, AFM is not an autoimmune condition. AFM is caused by a virus attacking the spinal cord. And I've made a video explaining the more medical side of AFM in quite a bit of depth that you can watch. I will link it up at the top right here for you all if you want to know more about that, but I will briefly go into it here as well. So the virus that causes AFM is thought to be enterovirus D68, which is a virus that causes a cold. Colds are not caused by just one singular virus. That's why there's no vaccine for colds, because tons of different viruses cause colds. And it's kind of the same with AFM. Enterovirus D68 is a virus that can cause AFM, but there are a few others as well. And so this is why AFM is going to be a very difficult disorder to develop a vaccination for, because there's not just one virus that is able to somehow get its way into the spinal cord and cause this damage. So vaccine treatment would be amazing to prevent AFM, but it will be very difficult to do, if not impossible to do. So yes, that's the main difference between the causes of TM and AFM. Now, the word flaccid is included in AFM because the paralysis pattern that AFM presents with is flaccid. The limbs are not spastic, they're flaccid. They move around. Like my left hand, it just moves. It's flaccid. It's not clenched up. It's not spastic. I don't really have spasms. So the people who have AFM typically have this flaccid paralysis. Whereas with TM, the paralysis is usually more spastic. It's usually not presented in a flaccid manner. Those people typically have like spasms. So that is another main difference between the two. Additionally, AFM affects the lower motor neurons. That is why there is such an odd pattern of damage when it comes to AFM, because your lower motor neurons affect the muscles that they innervate. So they connect to specific muscles. So like, let's take my left hand, for example. There are lower motor neurons that connect to muscles in my hand, and I can't move my left hand because the lower motor neurons that connect to these muscles in here are damaged. And it's actually the cell body of the lower motor neurons that are damaged specifically. So it's not even the whole neuron. It's just when it comes to complicated neurological things like this, when there's one thing that's messed up, the whole system basically shuts down. So the signals in my brain work. The signals are able to get down my spinal cord in some manner, but once they reach those lower motor neurons, they can get through the dendrites, but then when they get to the cell body, they shut down. The signal can't get through anymore. And that's why I can't move my hand and other parts of my arms. So yes, another difference there is TM, it's typically upper motor neurons, not lower motor neurons. And with AFM, it's your lower motor neurons that are damaged. And then another difference, which is one that I mentioned earlier, is with TM, typically people lose all their sensation, but with AFM, we don't lose all of our sensation. And that's because sensation, if I'm giving a very basic explanation of how sensation works, there are two sections of your spinal cord, the anterior and the posterior. And the posterior cord is what controls sensation. So with AFM, the posterior cord is not affected. It's only the anterior cord. Again, it's much more complicated than that, but if we're just giving the very, very basic definition of sensation and spinal cord, you can think of it as anterior and posterior cords. They're actually not two completely separate entities. They are one thing, but that's just a more basic definition. So that is another difference. Another thing is that TM can be caused by vaccines. There are people who have gotten TM after receiving a vaccination. But with AFM, so far, as of the time this video is made, there have been no reports of AFM being caused by a vaccine. And if you really think about it, that makes sense, because the virus that causes AFM, like I said, is just like a cold virus basically, and a few others. And there are no vaccines for those viruses. So if you got a vaccine, it wouldn't cause AFM. Whereas with TM, it's an autoimmune condition. So that could occur if there is a virus from a vaccination in your body, because your body is going to be working to fight that virus. That's how vaccines work. Your body develops the antibodies for that weakened form of the virus that doesn't hurt you, so that if you actually end up getting the real live virus, your body knows how to take care of it and get rid of it. When your body is fighting that dead or weakened form of the virus, it ends up attacking your spinal cord. So that's the difference there with the whole vaccine thing between these two disorders. So yeah, in essence, those are the main differences between TM and AFM. That's my diagnosis journey for you all, how I went from being diagnosed with TM in 2010 to AFM in 2018, and now here we are in 2021. I've been diagnosed with AFM for 3 years. I was most likely one of the earliest cases of AFM, which is so wild to me, and I really hope that there can be more research done on AFM to figure out why exactly this happens, why it takes on a very similar pattern to polio. It is basically modern polio. Like I said, it's not polio, but it occurs every other year, just like polio did. And similar to polio, whereas most people just had the polio virus, which made you sick, most people weren't actually paralyzed. With AFM, most people just have a cold. All of us don't actually end up becoming paralyzed. It's just a select few. So I find that really interesting, the similarities between AFM and polio. It's really kind of eerie in a way, but interesting and somewhat fascinating. So I love talking about TM and AFM and the differences between the two. I find it such a fascinating topic. So if you have any questions, please do leave them in the comments for me. I love answering questions about the whole scientific aspect of TM and AFM. It's super interesting to me. And yeah, that's my diagnosis story. That's TM and AFM for you all. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like, leave me a comment, hit that subscribe button, and remember to hit that notification bell so you never miss a video of mine. I post new videos every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern and sometimes Fridays at 4 p.m. Eastern. So I hope to see you at the next one. Bye!